Good evening, Pepe Soto here from North Shore Foundation. Welcome to tonight, our fifth session this year on books about the Vietnam War. Going to cover this book called Party Dolls. It's a pretty amazing book. We have the author with us, George Hayward. But first, I'll introduce Mr. Dick Dazzo, Executive Director of the Foundation. Dick, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the book club. We're coming down to the last couple of sessions during our year emphasizing the exit from Vietnam 50 years ago. It's been a great series. You can catch all of these sessions recorded on our website, on our uh, book club page. If you go down to the bottom, and you can review those or tell your friends about them. I get emails every week after these are over that says, I missed it. How do I see it? And that's how you see it. We've got a lot of great things coming up in 2024. Real quick, I'll tell you ahead of time. On the 9th of May is our annual membership meeting and annual awards banquet in DC at the Army Navy Country Club. Mark your calendars. It's going to be a great one. More details to follow. We've got a special incentive membership drive. It's sort of an auction where you can renew your membership and get some really great objects for the holiday gifting season. That'll be coming up in a couple weeks. John is heading that up. We've got some really great things coming up early on. We're going to try a podcast next year. We've got a newsletter going to come out in early 2024. A whole bunch of things on our plate. And we're always real happy to have this anchor of the book club to get the word out, get you to our website, look around and see what we have. And I hope you enjoy tonight. And George, thanks for joining us. Pepe, back to you.
Thanks. Did you do the author, George Hayward? And this is an amazing book. It's a book I read twice in the last month because it's got to go back and take each chapter once at a time. So, George, thanks for joining us. Over to you, sir.
All right. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm really honored to be here with y'all. So get right into the story. May 10th, 1969, two American U.S. Air Force captains, Vietnam POWs, escaped from a Hanoi prison the Americans called the Annex. They escaped after about a year of planning and with the help of their fellow POWs, but that help was not given freely because their 7 cellmates and other men thought they were sure to fail and everyone would suffer in the aftermath. And when they finally went, sure enough, that is what happened. And Ed Atterbury died, most likely in torture in the aftermath. If you go search the history books about this escape, you won't find much more than just what I just told you just now. My book is the most detailed and accurate accounting of the escape, and I get that from the POWs themselves who tell me that, and I'm very proud of that. Yeah, I don't know where to go from there. It's just it's a tragic story. It's a heroic story. It is a conflicted story. Yeah, Pepe, you want to throw me some questions and we'll start going, or do you want me to tell more about it?
Well, sounds good. We'll start Q&A now then. So,
Yeah.
First question I got is, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, my first boss, now, just so you all know, I did 12 years in the Air Force enlisted back in the 80s and 90s. And first 3 years I was space systems, and then I retrained into public affairs. I was a journalist before I went in the Air Force, so why they put me in space, I don't know. But I retrained into public affairs, and my first boss in public affairs was a retired 06 civil service, one of the men that was in the cell with Dramisi and Ed Atterbury, Bill Baugh, and very much a mentor to me, a man that taught me a lot in life. Most importantly, there's no such thing as a bad day, because when you work for a man like that and you see and you hear what he went through on a daily basis, it kind of resets your whole priorities in life. But Billy used to talk a lot. He was one of the more renowned speakers here in the local area, not just to military audiences. He'd tell the story of his internment, and he'd do so with eloquence and humor, and he'd have you laughing and crying. But he always had a few minutes snippet about the escape itself. And as I said, there isn't a lot of information out there, and the escape always fascinated me for the conflicts that were built into it within the code of conduct, among the men in the cells themselves. It was both a human story and a military story, and I set out to write it, and it took me a lot longer than it should have.
How were you able to get the foreign POWs to discuss the story with you? Something that was this harsh against all the POWs ramifications after the escape by the Viet Cong. How'd you get them to even talk about it?
It actually wasn't hard. Most of them were eager to tell the story. Bill Baugh and Mike McGrath. Mike McGrath is another POW. Mike was in the cell next to them. In fact, let me backtrack to set it up. At the time, in the annex where they were being held, there were 9 men to a cell and 2 cells to a building. And so the Dramisi and Atterbury were in one cell, and the camp's SRO and 8 other men, including Mike McGrath, were in the cell next to them. So Mike McGrath is also retired here in the Colorado Springs area, and I met Mike through Bill. Between the two of them, they connected me to the entire POW network, everyone but Dramisi. Dramisi was a black sheep. That's literally what they called him. They didn't have any contact with him, but they helped me track down an address for him. And I was still on active duty at the time, writing for Airman Magazine, and it took me multiple interview requests to finally get him to agree. And for him, I and a photographer flew out. He was living on a farm in rural Pennsylvania, and flew out there, TDY, and spent an afternoon on his farm and heard his side of the story there. But the rest of them were eager and happy to help me and tell the story.
So why I think this story is so important to tell.
Well, it's untold. As I said, there isn't a lot of information out there. His death was always a mystery, even to other POWs. There was a lot of speculation what happened. And to me, just stories of conflict and fascinate me. One of my experiences in life is there's not a lot of black and white. Quite often there's a lot of gray in between. And this is such a story. It's both tragic and heroic. It's an illustration of an amazing feat that men could do or almost do together when they're working together, but also the conflict that came with it. And it's a fascinating story.
For those who haven't read the book, Atterbury and Dramisi were the 2 guys who did the escape out of the prison. Place called the Annex, which is away from the Hanoi Hilton, on the other side of Hanoi. So it's about they figured about it's a crow flies 30 minutes across the to where Hanoi Hilton was at, according to what your book says about their truck rides and stuff. So there was about, I guess, 6 or 7 prisons in Hanoi, not just the Hilton itself, but all the way around the city where they had American prisoners at.
Yep.
And these 2 were at the place called the Annex, which is about 3 or 4 buildings. Is that right? In the Annex?
There were 8 buildings. Was it 8? 1, 2, 6 buildings in the Annex. And the interesting thing is the Annex was actually they called it the Annex because it was attached to another prison that the Americans called the Zoo. And it was a big complex. And first, all the Americans were in the Zoo for a couple of years. And then next to the Zoo was literally, it was like a 3-part complex. And the Zoo, then next to the Zoo, you had another walled off area that was the North Vietnamese. That's where their troops were barracked and the camp workers worked out of. And then next to that was the Annex. And they didn't open the Annex until 1967. So
Wow.
yeah, but one of the interesting things about the story is one of the challenges with the escape was no one in the cell knew exactly where the Annex was. They all had ideas and they had different opinions too.
Well, where it was in regards to Hanoi itself?
Oh, it was in Hanoi, kind of on the outskirts, not deep in the heart of the city. Yeah, about 4 or 5 miles west of the Yellow River. I'm sorry, not the Yellow River, the river.
Yep, the river. Got it. Everyone has heard about the torture of our POWs went through, but you go into a lot of detail about it. How the POWs you interviewed become so open about their ordeal and the brutality of the torture?
Yeah, it's a tough one. They all talk differently about it. Bill Baugh he talked about it often and publicly and did so with humor, right? as he used to say, then I was in a world of shit. Um, but others were more hesitant about it, and some of them were very emotional about it. You know, Connie Troutman, God bless that man, what a hero. But when he told me his story, he sobbed through a chunk of the torture and had me crying right along with him. It's hard.
I can imagine how it was to write that. And he doesn't ask the questions too.
Hmm.
I find it interesting that they had a hard time in the annex figuring out who the SRO was. And I think, you point out well that people forget these are all a bunch of captains that were flying fighters back then. So, you really had a major lieutenant colonel flying. So most of you guys were O3s, O2s, or O1s. So
Hmm.
do you find it's a common issue with the other camps about the SRO? Is this just this with the annex the way it was there?
I think it was the setup with the annex. You know, as I mentioned, the men were in 9 men to a cell, and there were only 2 cells to the buildings. The buildings, only one window wasn't blocked off. There was only one door in. When they were allowed outside, they were in a small courtyard that was about 12 by 12 with a 10-foot wall. They couldn't see anywhere else. And the North Vietnamese would stage their outdoor breaks so that no 2 adjacent rooms are out at the same time. So the NVA were doing their part to minimize the ability to communicate. So their only real ready means of communication was tap code. I think most people are familiar with the tap code, with the cell next to them. And in this case, in the annex, there were a lot of prisoners, including more than half of the guys in room 6 where the escape took place, who did not know the tap code until all 9 of those men were together. So you're trying to communicate building to building, well, room to room with tap code, and then I think a lot of people realize the POWs found all kinds of ingenious ways to use the tap code. You could flash, block light under a door crack or over a window to send it long distances. You could sweep in cadence to transmit. You could cough to transmit, all different ways. But that's how it was, that difficulty. And, realize it takes a couple minutes just to say one sentence. It can take a whole minute just to spell out a word. When you're trying to communicate cell to cell and building to building, it's virtually impossible. They said it took them months to figure out. I remember Mike McCustion said, "My God, we're all captains." They didn't realize, because all the majors and above, all the O4s and above were over in the zoo, and then the highest value prisoners were at the Hilton. So these guys were general aviators, O3s and below, a few enlisted guys as well. But yeah, and Connie Troutman, who had been in the service since World War II, was the senior ranking captain in the whole camp.
Wow, that was just you think about it now, the SRO battles you discuss in the book and how just talking about months and days, not, years of separation of rank, and how they'll just be so tough. And some guys who actually made the O4 list and hadn't pinned on yet. That also caused some conflict with them too, especially with Termesi, correct?
Big time, big time. Yeah, and it's kind of a legitimate question. What about the guys? When they start trying to figure out who the SRO is. Well, I'm a major. Well, the rule is it's your date of rank at shoot down. If you were a captain when you were shot down, you were a captain for your entire duration. Well, what about I was on the list, but I got shot down first, and then another guy was on the same list, but he pinned on and then he got shot down. Why should he outrank me and not him? And what about those of us who didn't get a chance to get promoted because we've been in here for a couple of years and we don't know if we have been promoted or not? They said there were a lot of legitimate questions about who should be SRO and what the criteria were. But I think that's one of the interesting leadership lessons. One of my takeaways from this was the utter importance of whatever the process is to determine the SRO. That's what you play by. Because you had one room changing the rules, one room changed the rules, and everything fell out of that.
Yeah.
For those who don't understand, Termesi made the argument that he should be the SRO of room 6, where the escape took place from, on the basis that he was a major. And Connie Troutman in the next room tried to see, well, if you're a major, you should be in command of the entire camp. And tap code and written notes. They said Dramisi was always kind of unclear about it. Well, I never got a chance to pin down. At the end of the day, he wasn't the ranking captain in his cell. Red Wilson was. And in another source of conflict, and boy, we're getting off into rabbit holes here. A lot of these guys knew each other from previous assignments, whether they knew each other well or just a little bit. There was a network among them. And Red Wilson and John Dramisi did not like each other before they even got into that cell. Now you get in there, Wilson's a senior ranking captain in there, but John Dramisi is saying, well, I should be in charge because I'm really a major. I just haven't pinned on yet. And it seemed obvious to everyone in the room that Wilson really didn't want the responsibility, and Dramisi did. So they all just kind of went along with it. And that broke the chain of command as the rule was set. And that set off a domino effect of events that led to Ed Atterbury's death.
Yeah, I thought when I read it, I just felt like he seized control as opposed to earned it.
Right. Yeah, he did. By the way, folks, those who don't know, David Bird that's on here, David actually edited the book for me. Dave is a retired Air Force historian, now Dr. Bird. And when I put this book together, I asked him to edit it both from a military history perspective and just, for the good set of eyes. And so I'm really glad to have him on the project and have him here with us tonight too.
But it was an honor to do it. It was an honor to do it.
As Dave said, Mike McCustian, one of the guys in the cell, I quote him in the book saying, how he usurped that from us, I don't know.
Wow. So in chapter 11, you cover the drudgery of day-to-day life in the summer of Hanoi. In talking to POWs, how do they have the resiliency to get through all of this when you have 9 guys to a cell, no air conditioning, hot and humid, no one's taking a shower, but they may wash off once a week. What was their mindset to get through all? I mean, it's just been hellacious in those cells in the summertime with just 2 honeypots in the third one. And then you jump them out just once a day, and guys had dysentery, and their diet's basically a piece of bread and a bowl of water, kind of brothy rice. How do they say they got to that whole summer? It just sounded like that itself was torture, just day-to-day living.
Right. It's just the daily existence that alone will reset your mindset and how you view your own life. For them, they first of all, they recognize they're all in it together. They find ways to entertain themselves. They would talk movies, tell movies. If you saw a movie or read a book, you tell the story and you entertain everyone for a couple hours by telling the story. And they called them Hanoi rules. That, for instance, let's say you and I saw the same movie, but I'm telling the story in the cell and I get part of the story wrong. You can't correct me. How I'm telling the story is how the movie went. They taught each other different, they taught games, they made cards out of toilet paper. One of the interesting things is even in that sense, they shared skills with each other, languages and whatnot. In the book, Dramisi taught Mike McCustian and Wally Newcomb how to walk on their hands. And like Wally Newcomb said, in that sense, Dramisi was a pretty good roommate, actually. But it's filling time, man. They had 23 hours, 24 minus whatever you sleep, really, to fill time, and you find ways to do it.
Jeez. Okay, during the book, we talk about Colonel Reiser, Robbie Reiser, was the SRO for the whole wing at the time, and his order was no escape without outside assistance. But Captain Schrottman was very clear to the escape committee in the other cell that the escape was for planning and on not an actual escape, but plan for contingency in case they were hit by a bomb or a flood came through or storm. To escape for survival of the basic survival, not to escape and get away. But it would seem that would go against the code of conduct, Reisner's orders, because the code of conduct says that you should make every effort to escape. So I think that was a major reason for the tension for Dramisi and his cellmates in the cell, was that they had Reisner's order. They had Dramisi pointing out that, but our job is to make every effort to escape. almost conflicting on, was that Article 4, I think it was, or 3?
Mhm.
Article 3?
Yeah. 3 and 4. Yeah, three obligates you to make every effort to escape and assist your fellow prisoner in doing the same. And then Article 4, in part, says, I will take no action that will bring harm upon my fellow prisoner. So now you get into the crux of the conflict, and circling back to Robbie Reisner here, no one knew where he was, whether he was in that camp in the zoo, whether he was alive or dead. So Troutman was very tortured by, is he even in charge anymore? Do I have the authority to overrule him? Then also, planning an escape is not the same as doing one. He felt it was important to have a contingency plan. For instance, as you pointed out, if a bombing raid blew a hole in the wall, or as he said, if the Vietnamese started executing prisoners and they needed to get out of there, they wanted to have some sort of plan that how they could have a mass escape. And Dramisi also pushed the idea of having a single person escape. So he was supposed to be planning really 2 escapes, one for the whole camp and one 2-person operation that could be done from any cell.
Yeah, and the thing about Article 4, which gets me, is that Dramisi had to know, and Atterbury had to know that if they escaped, the ramifications against the whole, all the cellmates in the whole prison would be brutal. But yet they still went to escape. And I guess all the cellmates knew, all hell's going to break loose once that happened also. So what was Dramisi's mindset? And you couldn't talk to Atterbury, but what do people think about Atterbury's mindset? Because he seems to be very quiet the whole time while in captivity, Vice being the as vocal as Dramisi was about escaping.
Yeah, we don't really know where Atterbury stood on it. He was kind of a go along with Dramisi. Everyone felt he was kind of pushed into it or talked into it from Dramisi. But Dramisi, his point, on the torture element is it's flat out, as harsh as it sounds. He says flat out, who says being tortured makes you not obligated to try to escape, or something to that effect. He says you're a prisoner of war. Your job is to escape. It doesn't matter whether you're going to be tortured or not. So, but on the other side of the coin, your fellow prisoners are going, you're going to get all of us killed. And they firmly believed he couldn't succeed. Mike McCushon said, I'll give you 50-50 for getting over the wall. After that, you won't last till noon the next day, which turned out to be quite prophetic, because that's exactly what happened. They got captured before noon the next day. Because once you got over the wall, you're in Hanoi, you're 2 Americans, you stand out, you've got nobody to help you, and we're not even sure where we are. So if you're going to go, you're risking everyone else's lives for no chance of success in their view.
Wow. We got a question from Mr. Dixon. You want to ask it, sir? And it's probably one you can't answer. I don't think you there, Mr. Dixon.
Yes, I'll be happy to. I'm familiar with some of the guys who, once they were put back together, those that were officers and had college educations gave college educations to the enlisted guys.
Mm-hmm.
And based upon that, they went to Robbie Reisner and said, we believe these guys should be given battlefield commissions. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, vaguely. It's separate. It's separate from the story, but yeah, I am aware of that. Absolutely.
And when they got back to the States, of course, DOD said, well, you can't do that. It wasn't a war. And he said, well, either if you want to go public with it, that's fine, or I will. And They changed their mind. And I know at least one case where a guy, I think he might have been a PJ before when he was shot down, and ended up going to either nav training or pilot training.
Nice.
I thought this might be one of those cells. I don't know.
No, no. Everyone in both room 6 and the adjoining room 5 where Troutman and McGrath were 03s.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, what's your take on the 2 party doll guys? I mean, Jameis and Atterbury seem to be totally different. Look at them from personality wise. Yet they made this work attempt as a team. How do you see them working together? To me, it seemed like they were just so different as personality wise. Yet this was a two-man team to try to escape. What's your take on that? Why was it those two? Jameis was
Yeah,
obviously Atterbury.
anything with Atterbury, his motives and motivations is going to be speculative. Even his roommates, even his cellmates couldn't understand. And, he really didn't talk a lot about himself. Nobody really got to know him deeply or got to know what made him tick. Jermesi, on the other hand, was a driven dynamo. And I spent an afternoon with the man, and he could convince you the sky was red, when it was blue. And have you looking up going, wow, you might be right. Just a force of will, a true force of will, and make passionate arguments for his take on the code of conduct and what they were obligated to do. So it's kind of not hard when you look a lot at a lot of Atterbury's background. You can speculate on what might have motivated him. The fact that he was a reconnaissance pilot, which I firmly believe the NVA did not realize. He flew an F4, and I'm jumping rails here, but Atterbury flew an RF4, and I don't think they've realized it was an R model when they shot it down, because they kept all the high value targets at the Hanoi Hilton. They kept the O4s and above in the zoo, and they kept just the general aviators in the annex. And there he was with them, and his whole career. We're not talking about he just qualified for the RF4. His whole career had been spy planes. So he was an intelligence asset. And the guys in the cell also say he was part of the same letter writing program that Stockdale was part of at the Hilton with his wife, sending coded letters. And a third factor was Atterbury wasn't a college graduate. He got his commission through an aviation cadet program that ended like right after he came into Vietnam, and he had been passed over for major at least once. And there was a perception that he didn't have the same pedigree as other pilots, as his peers. So I think when you look at any one of those three factors, it's possible to see why he might have been motivated to try to get out of there, or to burnish his record to ensure a promotion, or who knows really. But Jermesi was just, whether you think he was doing it out of duty or for the glory, he was absolutely just driven to it.
So Atterbury, the letter writing campaign, the training. Can you talk about that a little more in detail? What exactly that was?
That was in the Smithsonian Channel did a fantastic 1 hour episode on it called "The Spy in the Hanoi Hilton," and it's about primarily about Stockdale and his wife. But there was a way for working with the CIA to send coded letters, and very few airmen were selected for this program before they deployed over there, and it was very secret, very obviously. And Stockdale's participation in it is pretty well documented. But yeah, one of the things that came out in the story was Wally Newcomb, who was one of the cellmates, said Atterbury told him he was worried about cracking under torture and revealing that.
You think that was what precipitated him from wanting to escape, was the fact that he knew so much about that code system and the letter writing system that he would probably break and give it to the Vietnamese?
Not just the letter writing code, but overall, when you flip back through his resume, he overflew Cuba during the missile crisis. He overflew Europe during the Cold War. He flew a number of airframes. He would have known their capabilities, what intelligence he collected. If the NVA figured out who he was, I firmly believe he was an intelligence asset, and they didn't realize what they had. And he wanted to hide that. And I also think that's why he was very careful. And this is when I say I think, I'm repeating things I've learned from the other guys. I think he did not reveal much of himself to them so that he could always be able to stay in the background. So no one would be able to tell anything about him that might give the Vietnamese a handle on him.
And David, you got a question or a comment? David Bird?
Oh yeah, it's just it's there in the chat, and what I said is I thought you did a really good job at not making judgments in the narrative. And so my question was, did you find yourself while you were during your writing process, did you find yourself being pulled one way or another as you got more information and this and that? And so did you have to kind of pull yourself back maybe and do some rewriting so that you could remove any judgment?
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
about your process.
Yes and yes and yes. I definitely had to refer back to my training as in education as a journalist and straight news writing without opinion. And if you're going to weave opinions into it, you have to clarify where they are and what they are. Yeah, to your point, Dave. Just talking to this group, Dramisi was a hard man to like. He really, really was. But I really wanted to give him a fair shake in this book and present his views because he was strong and passionate about them, and present them in a fair light. And if you read it and you came away from it going, man, he's hard to like, then okay. But I wanted to be as fair and objective as possible as I could.
Well, I thought you were, but I came away not really. I kind of appreciate Jameezy's attitude to a certain extent, but not the fact that he used the code of conduct. He cherry picked which articles would support his argument or what he wanted to do at the time. So
Yep.
he didn't fall through the letter each one. One thing I finished in was that the POWs on your book, you talked about how they ridiculed everything Jameezy did, getting ready for the escape. Yet they still provided massive support and supplies to make it happen. Now, what drove them to do this when they all said they thought it'd be unsuccessful, but they still went out of their way, getting broomsticks, put themselves at risk to get supplies for the escape. It seemed to me just such a, they're going both ways
It,
themselves.
it's a reflection on them adhering to their military duty, whether they agreed with him or not. He was the appointed SRO of the cell, and he was also the appointed chair of the escape committee from Connie Troutman. So he had the authority both within the cell and from the SRO to be planning an escape, and they were obligated to help him. And they also realized, if he's going to go one way or the other, whether we agree with him or not, we may as well give him a chance to succeed. And especially because at that time, most of these men were MIA or didn't know whether they were known POWs or MIA. So a lot of them, the attitude was, if there's a shred of chance they can succeed and bring our names out. In fact, there's a famous thing about there's a famous POW, Doug Hegdahl, was a Navy enlisted guy, and he got captured when he fell off a boat, and he was interred with all the other POWs, and he was one of the best at memorizing all the names of the men that were there. They were all expected to memorize the names of everyone that was in their cell, the adjoining cell, and the camp, as many names as you could remember, that if for any reason you got released, you could say, this man's alive, this man's alive, this man's alive. And so that was their motivation for helping is militarily they had to. He was their commanding officer, and B, if he's going to go, help him succeed so people can find out we're here.
So that fact you had no other PWs, I would just name other names or prisoners, it's going to be a primary reason for guys to escape and one of their primary duties. Yet Dramisi in your book totally disregarded doing that or saying anybody else's name. What was his justification for not being? I mean, that's your most important part. You're an intel asset to your country of who's escaped, who's a prisoner. Yet he just blew that off. Well, it looks that way in your book. You blew it off, and you didn't know anyone's name, which I guess kind of ticked out Trotman later on. What was his reason for not doing that?
I don't know, but you just hit on one of that was the last domino in that cell before they turned on him completely. For those who aren't familiar, there was a note being passed from building to building in which one of the other cells in another building was Troutman had a code name in their note passing at that time. They called him Twitty. And another building sent over a note that said, if the NVA asks who Twitty is, it's so-and-so in our cell. They were trying to protect Troutman. And when this note got read in room 6, Dramisi says, and I'm forgetting the guy's name. I'll say Ed West. I'm just making up a name. It's Ed West. Who's Ed West? That set off his cellmates, because you're supposed to be memorizing every name of every man, and you don't know the name of the guy in the next building. And that was actually what prompted what's famously called the note. The next day, room 6 sent a note over to Connie Troutman without Dramisi's knowledge, revealing the fact that he wasn't really the SRO in the room, and he wasn't really planning an escape for the whole camp, and he had been lying to Connie and doing this and doing that. And yeah, that was a major turning point in the whole story.
Now, a big thing happened with Troutman is that the night of the escape, the one having that where it was really crappy weather, power outage, rain, and everything to do their escape. That one that happened, and then when Dramisi goes up in a roof and comes down to talk to Troutman, he tells Troutman, I want to go tonight, and Troutman's response is, "I'm not going to tell you no," but he didn't tell him yes either.
Right.
And in your book, that seems to have haunted Troutman the rest of his life.
Mhm.
I think he was unable to say yes or no, knowing that if he escaped and was captured, all hell was going to break loose on him and everybody else in the cell. Why couldn't he make as an SRO, an officer, make that decision? What was this conflict? Because it seems such a easy, well, not an easy one, but it's a yes or no question, yes no answer. And he knew that he didn't trust the guy anyway. It's like he went and gets his own gun and let him go ahead and escape.
Yeah, Connie said, he knew that their planning was meticulous and detailed. He knew they had a solid plan and how they wanted to do it. And so how could he tell them no when they were sincere and legit and ready? He said, but I mean, in a moment like that, I can't imagine what would have gone through his head, knowing what he was agreeing to. And I think that's why, I guess you can say he punted and put it back on Dramisi. And basically Dramisi asked him, can I go tonight? And Troutman said, if you go without SRO approval. I leave it up to you. And there was silence for a moment, and Troutman said, Dramisi, what are your intentions? And Dramisi said, we're going. And they went. Dramisi didn't even go back into the cell. He called down through the ceiling vent, and the other guys, bewildered, hoisted Atterbury up, and the escape went down. And it was just like that. So I think Connie Troutman was tortured over that one from the moment the question was put to him.
The repercussions of the escape were brutal. I never read about the systematic torture, continuous torture of POWs over a prolonged period of time like this of the guys happened after the escape. It was a tough thing for me to read, was that one chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been tough for you to write all that down, but what went out to all the prisoners and how badly they went through all the massive tortures. I mean, being broken twice, some of them even 3 times, and a constant, almost to the point of almost dying during torture.
Yeah.
How are you able to capture that and actually write that down as an author? I mean, to me, it's a lot of bad stuff to put on paper about a fellow airman. How are you able to do that?
You're telling the story. You're telling their story. You're being their voice, and if you're going to do it justice, you've got to try to convey the emotion and convey the pain. But it's hard stuff to listen to. It's hard stuff to talk about to listen to another man talk about being tortured horribly, what it felt like and what it experienced to them. Like I said, writing this entire book, in addition to working for Bill Baugh 30 years ago, writing this entire book changed my worldview on so many things, just how I view my daily life.
I got a question from Matt. Matt, you want to ask a question? Matt, put on chat.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Yep.
can.
Hello?
Yep.
We hear
Uh,
you.
I'm only about 1/3 of the way through the book, but Dramisi seemed like a total bad apple from the get-go. But it seemed like everyone let him bully them into doing what he wanted, including letting him be the SRO, letting him appoint himself the head of the escape committee, letting him leave when he wanted. Why did they just let him bowl them over?
That isn't that one of the great questions? You know, Mike McCutcheon said why we did that or how we let him do that. I don't know. Yeah, and neither do I. But they did, and it wasn't, and you know, it built and it built until the not knowing the name of the of the other prisoner was the pimple that finally popped it. But for a year before that, yeah, you are absolutely right. He bullied them into his own will, and had the authority, and they didn't contest it. They could have contested his authority. They could have told the truth to Troutman earlier and said Red Wilson's really the senior ranking captain in here, but they didn't for whatever reason. And not one of them can yeah, Dave's right, sheer force of personality. He really is. I mean, he was a tornado of will. Even just the one afternoon I met him long after he was retired.
Yeah, but it seems to me, as being an airman and being in fire squadrons most of my career, I just can't see a bunch of fighter pilots just rolling over. I mean, of all the of the personnel we have in the Air Force, even the fire pilots wouldn't say, "Dude, screw you, get in a corner," and yet, like Matt just said, they all rolled. Um,
Right.
so was it just the environment of being in the cell and all the stuff they had gone through that caused us to say, "Screw it," or just kind of like, "Well, it's not going to shut up until we help them out." I mean, I read that chapter a couple of times, going like, I can't believe you guys are just not helping out, just letting them push you around, especially when you're talking about U.S. military fighter pilot who are usually 120% sure themselves more than anything else. That's
Sure.
hope got me.
Yeah, you think about that. You know, Pepe, you nailed that. You had 9 fighter pilots in one room, and somehow one guy was able to force his way to be in the Alpha Dog. That and knowing Bill Baugh was just he was 6'3", had a big booming voice, and he was just an intimidating guy. And Dramisi was all of 5'5", 5'5". You know, um, just how he did that to a room full of fighter pilots is just astounding. But he was one himself.
Yeah, that's probably what has was like. I just how that happens so it still boggles my mind also.
Right?
Um, so both Jamisi and Atterbury were where the Air Force crossed their escape attempt, which
Mm-hmm.
really surprising they both were. Um, even though it was what caused widespread pain and anguish for their comrades, they're still given the Air Force Cross. Uh, when you're talking to other POWs at that time, was there any resentment about them getting the Air Force Cross or any kind of backlash from the other POWs? It seemed to me that would have pissed me off that these guys had me tortured to the point of almost dying, and one guy actually did die, getting awarded a second highest award for heroism.
I I never heard anybody say anything resentful about the Air Force crosses. What I do think is they were Air Force crosses and not Medal of Honors because of the conflict involved. I do sincerely believe that. Um, John Dramisi, he said one thing to me that I fully agreed with, and the more I dug into the story, the more I saw that myself. That and all of them think Ed Atterbury should have had the Medal of Honor. Connie Troutman nominated him for it, and it was declined. I don't know why, and he didn't know either. But everyone, Dramisi and all his cellmates felt that Atterbury should have had the Medal of Honor. And Dramisi said the problem there was if you gave Atterbury the Medal of Honor, you validate the escape attempt. And if you validate the escape attempt, you validate John Dramisi, and they didn't want to do that.
Didn't the Air Force Cross do that also? That's the highest word for heroism. You got guys getting out in Mogadishu, catching old blood in the middle of the street.
Right? Right? Sure. But I think it's a public perception thing too. You know, how many civilians know what the Air Force Cross is? How many civilians know what the Medal of Honor is?
Yeah.
It's a different echelon in the public eye. Now you put the Medal of Honor on those two men with all the conflict that went behind the escape, and now that story is being pushed out into the fore at a time when it was very conflicted, controversial. They ended up changing the code of conduct. Here's something, a back piece that a lot of you, I actually don't touch on this a lot in the book, but I alluded to it early on. My last Air Force assignment was at Airman Magazine, and I sold them on letting me write this story for the magazine and started the interview process. That's when I interviewed John Dramisi. That's when I interviewed Connie Troutman. I was separating at the end of the calendar year '99. The story was the last story I was writing for them. After I wrote it and submitted it, they declined to publish it and said the story was too controversial. And this was
Wow.
25 years after they all came home, after Operation Homecoming. I think that's why they didn't want to make a big deal out of this story back then or in the ensuing years. And I think that's why at the very least Atterbury did not get the Medal of Honor.
Now Troutman got the Air Force Cross also.
Yes, he did.
And that was based on all he went through as yes, even though he did not make the decision, conflicted there, he still got the Air Force Cross. And how do they feel about that, the other prisoners?
His fellow prisoners worship Connie Troutman. Nobody would disrespect the leadership he showed in that camp. They felt he was in an impossible situation with Dramisi. Again, think about the difficulties they had communicating. I think Connie Troutman deserved the Medal of Honor. I write in the book, one of the other prisoners said, after what he went through, he should have got it too. Yeah, and he's one of the biggest heroes in the whole book. He really is.
And just from your perspective of talking to all the players and meeting them, except for Atterbury, and I know Dramisi thought she get the Medal of Honor. What do you think about Atterbury getting the Medal of Honor? Is that worth it? Was that discussion?
Yeah, Atterbury's the one. I think everybody thinks Atterbury should have received it. Yes, I don't think anybody wanted Dramisi to get it. There's a rumor out there too in that community that Dramisi nominated himself, which I'm not sure if you can do or if that's true.
Yeah, you can't do that. Yeah.
Okay, I will tell you guys. Rest in peace, because Dramisi passed a few years ago, and from the 9 cellmates and then Troutman. There's only 2 left alive. Mike McGrath, who was Troutman's cellmate, and among the principals in the book, and then Wally Newcomb. Mike McCutcheon's still alive, but his mind is failing, and yeah, he leads a quiet life now. But yeah, everyone felt that Atterbury deserved the Medal of Honor.
Okay, there's a question from Bill Strandberg. You want to ask a question, Bill?
Yeah, George, I haven't read the book yet, but having served for different commanders who you sort of wondered how they ever got promoted or got a command slot, how is it that Dramisi in his later career ended up like commander of the 509th, sort of the top SAC outfit in the Air Force and other arenas with all of this going on? Did anybody raise the issues that persisted in the camp, or were they sort of, like you've sort of alluded to, they just, didn't want to bring up the controversy? And he didn't make general, but he had a pretty good career and commanded some units. And I'm sure some people along the way resented the fact that he should not have had those positions. Is there any background or feedback from these guys?
You are spot on with that. I think a lot of people resented the fact that he continued on, but at the same time, I don't think his career was glorified as much as the rumor in the POW community was, his last assignment, he was the wing commander at Peace in New Hampshire, and he got fired and retired out of there.
Whoa.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that he got fired, but that it sort of indicates maybe he should not have been there in the first place if somebody had stepped up and said something earlier. We see that all the time in in our careers where somebody should have said, "Hey, this guy's not really meant to be an ops commander or a wing commander." Thanks.
Yeah, there was, and I won't go into details, but there was, you know, I mentioned early on that all these guys knew each other from previous assignments. There was, you know, each of them probably knew 4 or 5 other guys from somewhere else, and between them, there was all this big network. Atterbury was the only one that was outside of that network. They didn't know each other from previous assignments, and I heard a lot of really shitty gossip stories about Dramisi that I did not put in the book just because it was just dirt. You know, it's just wives and relationships and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
One quick question. You mentioned earlier, were you talking about Dramisi having done some reconnaissance flying earlier in his career?
No, that was Atterbury.
That was Atterbury?
Yeah, and had only flown reconnaissance. He'd never, I say they're all fighter pilots, but he actually never flown a combat. He'd always been reconnaissance.
Yeah, which, especially in the Cold War, put him in the position of having a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things.
Yes. Yes.
Same way with the EWO from the EB-66 that was shot down.
Right.
You know, he was very afraid of not getting captured for that reason.
Yeah, that would be a concern, man. Yeah, I think Atterbury was terrified of being put in the ropes and giving up things he really didn't want to give up.
So, George, a question I got for you and for the group also. I want to make this kind of a discussion piece. The crux of the whole book seems to be the conflict of Article 3 and Article 4 of the Code of Conduct. That only one word was changed. That was being bound to. Guess the other one was.
I think it's required now.
So, do you know the research you've done on this topic and this book you wrote? And I'm being a former Air Force member. Do you think the Code of Conduct today is still relevant? Or is it, you know, has it gone beyond that now that all of us know that you're going to get captured, you're going to break? I mean, it's happened in every war since Korea, Vietnam.
I think it's still very important because it's so much more than just what do you do when you're being tortured. You know, it's all about keeping faith in your country, with your service, with your fellow prisoner. And I think in just the horrific circumstances that it doesn't hurt to be reminded that you're excuse me, it doesn't, you know, in horrific circumstances like that, it doesn't hurt to be reminded that you have obligations still as a fighting man or woman.
Anybody else in the audience got any comments on that one? Wow. Okay. So we're moving ahead, we're moving pretty fast with the questions. I guess.
Hey, Pepe, it's Mobile here. I've got
Hey, sir. Good to see you.
A quick thing to weigh in. You know, first, I want to say it's an amazing book. I read it a couple of years ago. I shared it with my son, who's also, you know, a fighter pilot, to think about the dilemma that you captured really well of what happens when people under tremendous pressure have conflicting guidance and conflicting norms to follow, and how do people of goodwill try to work their way through it. It's a great story, and it's a great, I think, gift to airmen out there. You know, my take on the Code of Conduct is the thing that's most amazing to me is not that guys broke, as you said, Pepe, but that they had to be broken every time, over and over again. And what the Code of Conduct gave them was the fellowship and the loyalty to each other to be able to stand up and make them do it again. You know, they didn't get broken once and then they told them whatever they wanted, everything they wanted, they had to do it over and over and over. We know that part of the point was just to break them, not necessarily just to get information out of it. So, you know, I just want to thank you, George, for sticking with the story, for doing the hard work that it takes to sort through all the different parts of it. I agree that you did an admirable job of trying to tell all sides of the story and just describe to us this terrible environment where you're stuck between conflicting guidance and responsibility, and everybody, you know, you can argue with Dramisi, you can argue with the things he did, but when you read what he said and you talk to him, you walk away feeling like he was absolutely certain he was doing the right thing.
Mhm.
That as he interpreted different guidance, that was the prime directive. As other people interpreted it, it was escape if it's really possible to escape as you work through it. So I just wanted to say thanks as the chairman of the board of the Historical Foundation, and thanks for sharing the book. Thanks for writing the book, and thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it very much. And I feel like you did a good job capturing the conflict in the book very well there. Thank you.
George, a question I didn't write down, I've been thinking of the last couple of days that I didn't see in the book was, what did Reisner think about this whole escape thing and the fact that his guidance was seen as conflicting with the other prisoners? Anybody ever ask Robbie his opinion, perspective on that?
I haven't, and I've never heard any feedback that it trickled to him, or trickled back from him.
It would have been interesting to hear what his perspective would have been on the whole issue.
Right?
Especially
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
I suspect he would have supported Connie Troutman's leadership and his decisions.
So we're almost at the witching hour, almost at the hour limit. So I want to ask you one final question: is what do you think are the key lessons today's airmen should take away from the story?
I think the absolute importance of the chain of command. Remember that this whole thing started dominoes when Room 6 broke the chain of command and let someone who wasn't senior take charge. I think the importance of teamwork and unity, and I also think there's just important lessons about everyday life and the things we take for granted, and how we conduct ourselves towards other people. And yeah, Bill Baugh used to talk about it was the little things. He had an amazing knack, and this is what I try to emulate, is he had an amazing knack for not sweating the small stuff, but also enjoying the small stuff, taking pleasure in the little things in life while not letting the little annoyances drag your day down. And I thought that was a unique gift. And I know he gained that gift after he came home. And it's the one thing in a personal, on a personal level, I try to emulate. But again, back the unity within your unit and chain of command for military leaders.
Awesome, George. Well, thanks so much for one. Like General said, General Holmes, the book's amazing. I was mad at myself for just reading it now. That it's part of my career, but I think it's like I said to you earlier. I think every airman should read it and understand the hardest conflict our guys went through in Vietnam. So thanks so much for writing and being part of our session tonight. So
Well, thanks for having me. Thank you for having me. I've loved this. This is great, and I'm humbled to be here.
That's our wraps up session number 5. Number 6 will be next month on December 13th. We're going to have the book called Moral Imperative, 1972 Combat Rescue and the End of America's War in Vietnam by Darrell Wickham. Darrell's one who also wrote Bat 21. So it's good to talk about CSAR, and kind of wraps up our discussion of the Vietnam War for this year. So again, for the foundation, thanks everyone for being here tonight. Appreciate everyone coming on a Thursday night. And then again, thanks to you, George, for your time, and of course, putting this great story together for us to know and learn from. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Y'all have a great night. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone, too.
Thanks, Peppy.